Victoria had built an empire worth $1 billion. But in that backseat, with one laugh, she almost lost it all. She didn't know the man she was mocking would soon become the reason her empire survived. New York City, the city that never sleeps, never forgives, and never forgets. Its skyline shimmered like a field of diamonds under the rising sun. Down below, the streets roared with yellow cabs, blaring horns, and the hurried footsteps of people chasing their next dollar, their next dream, or maybe just their next meal. But far above those streets, inside a glass tower that kissed the clouds, Victoria Stone stood before a full-length mirror, fixing a single strand of her golden hair that dared to fall out of place. For Victoria, perfection wasn't an option. It was her identity. She wasn't just rich. She was legendary. The youngest self-made female billionaire in the fashion world. CEO of Stone Enterprises, a global luxury empire that had conquered everything from Milan runways to New York billboards. To the world, she was a symbol of success. To those who worked for her, she was a storm in heels. Her personal assistant, Nora, waited silently at the door, holding Victoria's tablet and a steaming cup of almond milk latte. "Miss Stone, your driver is waiting downstairs," Nora said softly. Victoria's reflection smirked. "Driver? The new one?" "Yes, ma'am. Michael Harris, I believe. Hired last week through the agency." Victoria picked up her designer handbag, glanced at her reflection one last time, and replied, "Let's see if he can keep up with my schedule." "Most can't." The elevator doors opened into the private lobby. Victoria stepped out, heels clicking sharply on marble floors. Outside, a sleek black Rolls-Royce waited, polished like obsidian. Beside it stood the new driver, tall, mid-50s, with streaks of gray in his neatly trimmed hair and calm brown eyes that carried quiet confidence. As she approached, he opened the door with a polite nod. "Good morning, Miss Stone," he said, his voice carrying a gentle southern drawl. "Beautiful day, ain't it?" The words hung in the air, warm, harmless, but Victoria's eyebrows twitched. A faint smirk touched her lips, the kind that said more than words ever could. She murmured, slipping into the car. "Let's just get going." As he closed the door and settled behind the wheel, Nora joined her in the back seat. The car rolled smoothly into Manhattan's traffic. For a few moments, silence reigned, until the driver tried to break it. "So, Miss Stone, I hear you're in the fashion business. My wife used to sew dresses for our church choir back home. Guess you could say I'm familiar with style in a small-town way." Victoria didn't even look up from her tablet, but Nora caught the faint twitch of amusement at the corner of her boss's mouth. A second later, Victoria leaned closer to her assistant and whispered, just loud enough to be cruel, "God, he sounds like a farmer who got lost in the city." Nora's eyes widened. "Ma'am," she began, but Victoria waved her off, smiling to herself. Michael heard every word. He didn't flinch, didn't defend himself. He just smiled faintly, eyes still on the road, calm, composed, as if he'd seen arrogance like this before. Because he had. Victoria Stone wasn't always like this. 10 years ago, she was just another ambitious girl in a crowded city, dreaming of success. But when her mother died from a preventable illness, because the hospital refused treatment without insurance, something inside her broke. She swore she'd never be poor again, never be powerless again. And from that day, she built walls around her heart, walls of steel, gold, and silence. Now, at 33, she owned an empire, but she'd lost the ability to feel empathy. At her office, employees whispered her name like a warning. She doesn't tolerate mistakes. She fired an entire marketing team for being 5 minutes late. She once ended a partnership over a misplaced comma. To her, weakness was a disease and compassion a luxury she couldn't afford. That morning's drive was to the Conrad Hotel, where she was about to close the biggest deal of her career, a $1 billion merger with a European fashion conglomerate. The deal would double her company's value overnight. It would make her untouchable. As the Rolls glided through traffic, she rehearsed her lines. "We don't follow trends. We create them. Our brand defines modern luxury." Every word precise, rehearsed, lethal. But while she prepared to secure her empire, something else was brewing, something that would soon test everything she'd built. Inside the car, Michael glanced at the digital news display near the dashboard. A headline flashed briefly before vanishing into the next story. Anonymous sources leak Stone Enterprises. Internal reports, allegations of concealed product defects. Michael frowned. He'd seen that kind of headline before. Once, years ago, when he was a corporate auditor for a global firm before it all collapsed. Before he lost everything. He didn't know it yet, but fate had placed him back in that same world, only this time. On the other side of the glass, Victoria entered the grand ballroom like a queen arriving at her coronation. Cameras flashed. Investors applauded. Her smile poised, perfect and hollow, never faltered. On stage, she spoke with practiced grace. Stone Enterprises isn't just a company. It's a legacy of vision, precision, and excellence. Applause thundered through the room. Every flash of a camera captured her like a goddess of power, beautiful, cold, untouchable. Meanwhile, outside, Michael stood near the car, watching the same headline resurface on his phone, this time with breaking updates. He clicked the volume up slightly. A news anchor's voice said, "Unverified documents claim Stone Enterprises hid defective production reports from investors. If proven true, this could jeopardize the upcoming merger." Michael's jaw tightened. He knew what this meant. He'd seen empires crumble from smaller cracks than this. When Victoria returned an hour later, glowing with pride, he turned and said carefully, "Ma'am, forgive me for speaking out of place, but I think there's something you need to see." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" He handed her his phone. The headline glared in red across the screen. She glanced at it for a second, then scoffed. "Oh, please. The media loves drama. Don't believe everything you read. But, ma'am, I don't need business advice from someone who drives cars for a living." She cut him off sharply, her tone dripping with superiority. Michael nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." Then, softly, out almost to himself, he added, "Sometimes the people you look down on are the ones trying to lift you." Victoria didn't respond, but for the first time that morning, she didn't smile. By the time she reached her office that afternoon, the whispers had started. Her head of PR rushed in, face pale. "Ma'am, it's everywhere. Bloomberg, CNBC, and even social media. The leak's spreading fast." Her stomach dropped. "What leak?" "Product safety reports. Someone leaked internal files from last year's recall. Investors are demanding explanations." Victoria felt her heartbeat quicken. "This can't be happening." "Ma'am, the European board is suspending the merger until this is resolved." The billion-dollar dream was unraveling, thread by thread, and she didn't even know who had pulled the first one. In a moment of desperate anger, she shouted, "Find out who's responsible. I want names." But the room was silent. No one dared speak. Her empire, her perfect empire, was crumbling in real time. That night, as the city lights shimmered outside her penthouse window, Victoria stood alone, phone in hand, scrolling through an endless stream of articles attacking her name. Then, the phone rang. She almost didn't answer, but something in her gut told her to. It was Nora. "Ma'am, it's the driver," Nora said cautiously. "He called. He said he might know something about the leak." Victoria frowned. "The driver? Are you serious?" "I don't know how, but he sounds certain." For a long moment, Victoria said nothing. Then, quietly, almost reluctantly, she replied, "Tell him to come up." Half an hour later, Michael stood in her penthouse living room, hat in hand, posture humble yet strong. Victoria eyed him suspiciously. "You think you know what's happening in my company?" "I don't think, ma'am. I know," he replied calmly. "I've seen this kind of sabotage before. Whoever leaked those reports, they're not just exposing the truth. They're planting lies." Victoria crossed her arms. "And how would you know that?" Michael reached into his pocket, pulling out an old corporate ID. It read, "Michael Harris, Senior Corporate Auditor, Everline Group. I used to investigate corporate fraud," he said quietly, "until my company got destroyed from the inside, just like yours is about to." Victoria stared at him. The man she mocked that morning for his accent, now standing before her like the ghost of wisdom she never wanted to hear. And for the first time in years, she felt fear. Real, raw fear. Michael turned toward the city lights beyond the glass windows. "Miss Stone," he said slowly, "power doesn't die in explosions. It dies in silence when the people at the top stop listening to the ones below." Victoria didn't respond, but deep inside, she knew this man wasn't ordinary. Something about him, the calm, the certainty, told her he had more to say, much more. As he left, she watched him go, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the marble hall, just like her laughter had echoed that morning, only now, it didn't sound so confident. It sounded like the beginning of something she couldn't yet understand, something that would soon change everything. The night after that awkward ride, Victoria couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard that accent again, soft, respectful, but steady, like someone who had nothing to prove. She had laughed at it once. Now it haunted her. The next morning, her calendar overflowed. Meetings, reports, investors were waiting for answers she didn't yet have. Her company, Betrayal Tech, was bleeding from the inside. Someone had leaked confidential data about a merger, and her competitors had moved faster. Billions were at stake. She stepped into the elevator of her corporate tower, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. The moment the doors slid open at the lobby, there he was again, the driver, Samuel, standing by the car, hands folded, uniform crisp. His eyes lifted when he saw her, calm and unreadable. "Good morning, ma'am," he said quietly. She hesitated. For the first time, she actually looked at him. His voice, the same accent she once mocked, didn't sound foreign anymore. It sounded grounded. "Morning, Samuel," she replied, a little softer than before. The drive was silent, but Samuel kept glancing at the mirror, studying her face, not out of rudeness but concern. He sensed the storm behind her calm expression. Finally, as they reached the freeway, he spoke. "Ma'am, if I may, something's been troubling you lately." Victoria didn't answer. She wasn't used to her employees asking personal questions, but his tone wasn't intrusive. It was thoughtful, even protective. "Just business matters," she muttered. Samuel nodded slowly. "Business troubles have a way of showing a person's real friends," he said quietly, "and their enemies." Those words hit her. They weren't something you'd expect from a chauffeur. She frowned. "What makes you say that?" He smiled faintly. "Because I've seen it. Sometimes the enemy sits closer than you think. Sometimes right beside you." Before she could reply, her phone buzzed. Another board message, another emergency. She sighed and looked away, but his words stayed with her. That evening, the pressure hit its peak. Her legal head reported that someone from inside had approved a transaction that almost transferred Varel's patents to a shell company. Victoria's empire was seconds from collapse, and yet she didn't know whom to trust. She sat alone in her office as rain streaked the glass. Everyone had left except Samuel, who waited outside, as always, quietly by the car. She stared at the contract papers, her hand trembling. When she finally stepped into the car, her voice was almost a whisper. "Samuel, you ever feel like you're being hunted?" He didn't look back. "Always, ma'am. When people have something valuable, someone will always want to take it from them. Then how do you deal with it?" He smiled faintly. "You stay observant. Watch the ones who smile too much. Listen to the ones who talk too little." Victoria stared at him, realizing this man spoke like a strategist, not a driver. "Where did you learn all this?" Samuel's eyes stayed on the road, life, and a little time in places most people wouldn't survive. That was the first time she truly wanted to know who he was. 2 days later, a major investors' dinner was scheduled. The city's elite, and the same competitors who were trying to crush her would be there. Samuel drove her to the venue but parked a few blocks away. "Ma'am," he said suddenly, "before you go in, may I ask to see the guest list?" She blinked. "The guest list? Why?" "Because someone there isn't who they claim to be." She frowned. "How would you know that?" He turned in his seat, eyes calm but serious. "I recognize names, ma'am. Some of them belong to people I knew when I worked security overseas." That froze her. "Security? Where?" He didn't answer. He only looked ahead. Just trust me tonight? Inside the ballroom, Victoria wore her best smile, shaking hands with people who secretly hoped she would fall. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes, every investor, every whisper. But in a quiet corner, Samuel stood disguised as staff, watching everything. His gaze moved like a camera, scanning faces, reading lips, tracking gestures. Then, at the dinner table, he noticed something. A man in a gray suit, supposedly an investment consultant, was typing rapidly on his phone, forwarding details of the company's upcoming acquisition, the same information that had been leaked weeks ago. Samuel's pulse quickened. He slipped out quietly, used the hotel's staff corridor, and accessed the security control room. Within minutes, he rewound the feed, captured the man's actions, and sent a silent alert to Victoria's personal email. Moments later, as she lifted her glass for a toast, her smartwatch buzzed. A message appeared. The leak is sitting 3 seats to your left. Look for the man in gray. Her heart skipped. She turned slowly. The man smiled back at her, unaware she already knew. Victoria calmly lowered her glass. "Excuse me for a moment," she said, rising with quiet grace. She walked straight to the security officer and whispered something in his ear. Within minutes, 2 guards escorted the man away discreetly. No one in the room realized that the entire trap had just been neutralized, all because her driver had noticed what no one else could. When she stepped outside later that night, the rain had stopped. Samuel stood by the car, the same calm expression on his face. "How did you know?" she asked softly as he opened the door. He hesitated, then said, "Because I used to be the one protecting people like you. Before life took a turn." Victoria studied him. "You were military?" He nodded once. "Intelligence officer. Until I learned the hard way that truth doesn't always serve those in power." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then finally, "Thank you, Samuel. You may have just saved everything I built." He smiled faintly. "No, ma'am, you built it. I just made sure no one stole it." The next morning, the story broke. Corporate spy arrested at investor gala. Burrell Tech shares began to recover, but Victoria couldn't stop thinking about how easily she had misjudged the man who'd been beside her every day. She invited Samuel to her office. He entered quietly, standing with his hands folded. "Samuel," she began, "I owe you an apology." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am." "Yes, I do," she insisted. "I laughed at you that day, because of your accent, because I thought I was above you. And yet, you saved my company. Why?" He looked at her, his gaze steady and kind. "Because dignity isn't about titles, ma'am. It's about doing what's right, even when nobody's watching." Her eyes softened. For the first time, Victoria smiled, not as a CEO, but as a human being. That evening, Samuel stood by the car again, but something felt different. He had become more than a driver now. He was her silent guardian, and though she never admitted it, she began to trust his instincts more than any of her board members. But Samuel wasn't finished yet. He knew the man in gray wasn't acting alone, and somewhere deep in the system, another betrayal was waiting, one that could destroy not just the company, but Victoria herself. As the city lights reflected on the car window, Samuel's eyes narrowed. He whispered under his breath, "The real game is just beginning. Never underestimate the quiet ones, because sometimes the person you overlook today is the one saving your world tomorrow." The city didn't sleep that night, and neither did Samuel. From the driver's seat, parked beneath the glow of the Burrell Tower, he stared at the mirrored glass where Victoria's empire slept. But he knew somewhere inside that building, someone was still awake, someone erasing traces, covering footsteps. He opened his worn leather notebook, the same one he'd carried since his military days. Inside were pages of numbers, names, patterns he'd noticed over the past few weeks. One name kept appearing: Elliot Rains, Burrell's chief financial officer. A man polished to confident, and always the first to defend whoever got caught. Samuel muttered quietly, "It's never the loud ones, it's the ones who smile when others panic." The next morning, Victoria arrived early. Her eyes showed exhaustion, but there was something else now: trust. "Samuel," she said softly, "walk with me." He followed her through the marble corridor toward her office. She didn't look back as she spoke. The man in gray was just a pawn. Someone funded his access. Our internal system was breached again last night. Different ID, same server path. Samuel's jaw tightened. Inside job. She nodded. But the board doesn't believe it. They think I'm paranoid. He stopped. Then let me look. Quietly. Victoria studied him. For a moment, the corporate mask faded. She saw not a driver, but a soldier who'd seen darker wars. She handed him a security badge. Use this? No one must know. That night, long after the staff had gone, Samuel entered the 42nd floor data center. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Screens blinked with endless code. He moved like a ghost, silent, precise. Years of field work had taught him how to leave no digital fingerprint. He traced the system logs, line by line, until one folder caught his eye, Project Orion. It wasn't listed in any public directory, yet it consumed massive data flow every night between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., exactly when the company's firewalls ran. Backup protocols. He clicked deeper. The files were encrypted, but the sender's signature appeared for half a second, greater than Rain Z. Samuel's heart slowed. He copied the metadata onto a drive, then deleted every trace of his access. But as he turned to leave, he heard the faint echo of footsteps behind him. He froze. Working late, aren't we? Elliot Rains stepped from the shadows, tie loose, a casual smirk on his face. Samuel straightened. Just routine maintenance, sir. Rains chuckled. Funny. I didn't know drivers handled data maintenance. Samuel didn't blink. Miss Varel asked me to deliver a file. The CFO's eyes flickered, measuring him. Of course she did. Be careful what you touch, Samuel. Some files bite back. As he walked away, Samuel caught a glimpse of Rains's reflection in the glass while his smile had vanished. The game had officially begun. Back in his small apartment that night, Samuel plugged the drive into an old laptop, running a decryption script he'd written years ago. The screen filled with text emails, transaction receipts, hidden transfers to offshore accounts, every single one approved by Elliot Rains, and some were linked to Halcyon Tech, Varel's biggest rival. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, selling her out, piece by piece. The next day, Victoria was hosting a live investor briefing. Cameras, reporters, bright lights, everything to restore confidence. Samuel stood in the corner near the back, scanning the crowd. Rains was there too, standing close to the podium, whispering to a man Samuel didn't recognize. Then he saw a small flash drive in the stranger's palm, exchanged with a handshake. Samuel's instincts screamed. He slipped out of the crowd, made his way through the hallway, and reached the back exit where the stranger was headed. In one swift motion, Samuel stepped in front of him. "Excuse me," he said calmly. "You dropped something." The man frowned, confused. In that half-second of distraction, Samuel brushed the drive from the man's pocket and replaced it with an identical one from his own jacket. The man never noticed. Minutes later, inside the security room, Samuel plugged the stolen drive into the system. Encrypted files again? But this time, the encryption key was weak. He cracked it open and his blood ran cold. Inside were forged financial reports designed to make Victoria look guilty of fraud. If leaked, she would lose her company, her credibility, maybe even her freedom. He knew then, Rains wasn't just greedy. He was planning a corporate coup. When Victoria returned to her office after the briefing, Samuel was already there. She looked startled. "Samuel, what are you doing here?" He handed her the drive. "You need to see this before anyone else does." She hesitated, then inserted it into her computer. As she scrolled through the files, her face went pale. This would destroy everything. "Someone close is building a case against you," Samuel said. "You'll leak this to the press soon." She sat down, hands trembling. "Who?" Samuel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The name was already burning in her mind. "Rains?" she whispered. Over the next few days, Samuel quietly watched. Every movement, every meeting. Rains had grown bold, more confident, more reckless. He'd begun calling for emergency board sessions. proposing to take temporary control until Victoria stabilized. The board, unaware of the truth, began to waver. Samuel needed evidence strong enough to destroy Raines's plan before it reached a vote. He contacted an old friend from his intelligence days, Marcus Dale, now a cybersecurity expert. Marcus owed him a favor. Within hours, Marcus traced the offshore accounts to a single server in Zurich, sent back digital proof tying every transaction to Raines's fingerprint ID. Got him, Marcus said over the encrypted call. But be careful, Sam. He's not working alone. Someone's funding him. Who? Samuel asked. Unknown. The server reroutes through Halcyon Tech's private proxy. Samuel clenched his jaw. Then this isn't just about betrayal. It's a takeover. On the morning of the board vote, the tension inside Varel Tower was suffocating. Reporters camped outside, sensing a scandal. Victoria stood by the window, her reflection trembling against the skyline. Samuel, she said quietly, if this goes wrong, I'll lose everything. He adjusted his tie. Not if the truth speaks first. She looked at him, eyes filled with both fear and faith. Do what you must. The meeting began. Elliot Raines presented charts, reports, and fabricated data all showing Victoria's negligence. The board murmured in disapproval. Then the doors opened. Samuel walked in, calm and composed, carrying a single tablet. Excuse me, he said. Before you proceed, I believe you should see this. Raines glared. You have no authority here. Maybe not, Samuel replied, but truth doesn't need permission. He projected the files onto the big screen, every secret transfer, every email, every offshore payment. The boardroom went silent. Raines's face drained of color. These were sent from Mr. Raines's account, Samuel said evenly, to Halcyon Tech. Payments in exchange for Varel's data. Victoria stepped forward. Is this true, Elliot? Raines opened his mouth, but the words died. The evidence spoke louder than lies. Security escorted him out moments later, cameras flashing. Within hours, the news spread like wildfire. CFO exposed in espionage scandal, Varel CEO vindicated. The company's stock soared. Investors rallied behind Victoria again. But amid all the celebration, Samuel stayed silent, standing by the window as usual. When she found him there, she smiled faintly. You saved me. Again, he looked at her reflection in the glass. No, ma'am, you saved yourself. I just cleared the fog so you could see. She turned toward him. I don't know who you really are, Samuel, but I know this. I trust you. He nodded once. That's all I ever needed to hear. As the city lights glowed beneath them, Samuel's phone buzzed. A single encrypted message appeared. Greater than. Phase 1 complete. Awaiting next instructions. He stared at it for a long moment before deleting it. Something darker was moving behind the scenes, something even Victoria didn't know about yet. He whispered under his breath. The storm's not over. It's only changing direction. Truth is a weapon, but in the wrong hands, it becomes a trap. The city moved on quickly. Headlines changed, the scandal faded, and the world applauded Victoria Varel's triumph. But Samuel knew victories like this were never final. They were distractions. And in the silence that followed chaos, that's where the real enemies began to move. For the first time in weeks, Victoria smiled. Her company had stabilized, investors had returned, and her name was cleared. She stood on the balcony outside her office, watching the sunrise paint the skyline gold. Samuel stood behind her, quiet as ever. Feels peaceful again, she said softly. He nodded. Peace is the most dangerous illusion, ma'am. It makes you forget who's still in the shadows. She turned slightly, curious. You always sound like you've seen too much. I have, he replied. And I've learned that shadows don't disappear. They just move to darker corners. Later that evening, when the building emptied out, Samuel returned to the underground parking lot. He leaned against his car, phone in hand. The encrypted line connected after 3 rings. Phase 1 complete, a voice said. Samuel stayed silent. Your report. He exhaled. Raines is neutralized, but the source funding him is still active. Whoever they are, they wanted Varel, not just for the company. They wanted access to her research network. The voice on the line was calm, almost cold. Then phase 2 begins. Keep your position. Protect her until we have confirmation. Samuel's grip tightened around the phone. I'm not just her driver anymore, he said quietly. She trusts me. Don't make me lie more than I already have. The line went dead. He stood there for a long moment, staring into the city lights, the conflict heavy in his chest. For the first time, Samuel wasn't sure which side he was truly on. A week later, Victoria called an urgent meeting with her top team. New investors from Europe had shown interest, powerful names, private capital groups with deep influence. At the center of it all was one name, Lazarus Holdings. They're offering to triple our valuation overnight, said one of her advisors. It could take Varel global. Samuel, standing quietly by the door, looked up. That name again. Lazarus Holdings, he'd seen it before, buried in Raines's offshore files. Victoria smiled faintly. Set up the meeting. That night, Samuel opened his old laptop again. He dug through archived data from Zurich, tracing the financial path. Every lead ended at the same place. Lazarus Holdings, a phantom corporation with no public record of ownership. But one file remained locked. A code buried deep in the metadata. He decrypted it manually, line by line. When the file finally opened, a name appeared that froze him in place. Project Lazarus, overseen by Director M. Dale. Marcus Dale, his old friend. The same man who had helped him expose Raines. For a long time, Samuel sat in silence, the hum of his laptop filling the room. He whispered, "You played me, Marcus." The next morning, he confronted him. They met at a quiet cafe near the docks, a place with no cameras, no ears. Marcus arrived wearing his usual grin. "Sam, you look like you haven't slept in days. Still chasing ghosts." Samuel slid a tablet across the table. "You tell me?" Marcus's expression hardened as he saw the decrypted file. "So you found it. You're working for them," Samuel said quietly. "For Lazarus?" Marcus leaned back, sighing. "Working with them? There's a difference. They're not the enemy, Sam. They're the architects." "Of what?" "Corruption." "Of control," Marcus replied. "You think Varel's company is about cosmetics. It's a front. Their research division is developing neural mapping tech. Whoever controls that data controls the next decade of human behavior. Governments, marketing, surveillance, all of it." Samuel's voice darkened. "So you fed Raines to keep the heat off." "Exactly," Marcus said. "Sacrifice a pawn, protect the king. It's how the game works." Samuel stood slowly. "Then I'm done playing." Marcus smiled softly. "You were never playing, Sam. You were part of the board." That night, back at the Varel estate, Victoria poured herself a drink, the first time Samuel had ever seen her do it. "I should feel happy," she said softly, staring into the glass. "But I don't. Every time I think I've found peace, something new crawls out of the dark." Samuel hesitated before speaking. "There's something you should know." She looked at him sharply. "What is it?" He told her everything about Lazarus Holdings, Marcus Dale, and the encrypted files. By the time he finished, her hands were trembling. "So this entire scandal was just a setup?" "Yes," he said, "to bring your company under their control." She turned away, whispering, "They won't stop, will they?" "No," he said, "they never do." The next morning, Victoria canceled all meetings and locked herself in her office. Hours passed. When she finally emerged, her face was pale but resolved. "I'm going to meet them," she said. "Lazarus wants to talk. Let's see what they have to say." Samuel's instincts flared. "It's a trap, maybe," she replied, "but I can't keep running from ghosts." He stepped forward. "Then I'm coming with you." The meeting was set at a private penthouse overlooking the city. Only two people attended from Lazarus, a man and a woman, both impeccably dressed, both carrying the same cold stillness in their eyes. "Miss Varel," the woman said smoothly, "we admire your resilience. You've survived storms that would have crushed anyone else." Victoria didn't smile. "Flattery's not your style." "Why am I here?" The man placed a folder on the table. "Because your technology belongs with us. We can protect it, scale it, and in return, you'll remain the public face. Nothing changes except who controls the strings." Samuel's voice cut through the tension. "And if she refuses?" The woman's eyes flicked toward him. Then your name, Mr. Samuel Carter, will be the next headline. Former intelligence agent discharged under classified circumstances. A ghost pretending to be a chauffeur. How long before she learns who you really are? Victoria turned slowly to look at him, disbelief in her eyes. Is that true? Samuel didn't move. It was a long time ago. The man smiled. Everyone serves someone. Miss Varel, even him. Silence filled the room. The offer hung in the air, power or ruin. Finally, Victoria said, "You think fear will make me obey." The woman tilted her head. Not fear. Logic. Victoria stood. Then here's my logic. You may own data, networks, and names, but I own my soul, and that's something no one buys. She turned to Samuel. We're done here. They left wordless, walking through the rain-soaked streets. The tension between them was heavier than the thunder above. Finally, she whispered, "You should have told me." "I wanted to," he said quietly, "but the truth always comes with a price." She looked at him. "And what's yours?" He didn't answer, because deep down, he knew. The price was already being paid. That night, a car exploded outside Varel Tower. No casualties, just a message. A single card left on the ground, untouched by flame. "You've chosen the hard way, Lazarus." Victoria watched the news in silence, fear flickering in her eyes for the first time. Samuel loaded his gun and checked the security cameras. He knew what this meant. The war had officially begun. When you stand against power, you don't fight men, you fight systems built on silence. The night was still. The world outside Victoria's shattered empire had gone silent. But inside Samuel's mind, a storm was raging. He stood in the middle of a dimly lit garage, the same one where he once parked Victoria's car every morning. Now it looked like a war zone. The floor was littered with scattered maps, encrypted devices, and old photographs marked with red circles and lines connecting faces. Lazarus operatives, the quiet man everyone had ignored for years, was now preparing for war. He loaded his weapon with mechanical precision, his movements calm, deliberate. But his eyes burned with something darker, regret, determination, rage. As earlier, he had left Victoria without a word. She had begged him to stay, demanded answers, but Samuel couldn't give her what she wanted, not yet. He needed to finish what he'd started, the right way this time. He replayed her final words in his head. "Don't disappear again, Samuel, please." He exhaled deeply, whispering to himself, "Not this time, Victoria. This time, I disappear for you." A flickering screen lit up the table. Samuel leaned closer. The decrypted files from the Lazarus drive were finally complete. Lines of data streamed across the monitor, revealing coordinates, bank accounts, and classified communications. But buried deep inside, one folder made his blood run cold. Varel_01, Origin Protocol. He opened it, and there she was, Dr. Elena Varel, Victoria's mother. Her recorded voice echoed through the static. "If you're hearing this, it means Lazarus has succeeded. My research was meant to protect human cognition, not control it. They twisted it, used it to predict, manipulate, and own minds. To stop them, you must find the seed file. Without it, they cannot exist." Samuel's jaw tightened. Her voice, calm, intelligent, almost maternal, hit something deep inside him. He understood now. The empire Victoria built wasn't born from ambition alone. It was her mother's legacy, her fight, and Lazarus had stolen it all. He packed his gear, put on a black coat, and stepped into the cold night. Rain poured down in sheets as he walked down the alley, disappearing into the blur of neon and shadow. Every step had a purpose now. Every breath, a vow. Tonight, Samuel wasn't a driver. He was a ghost coming back for answers. The first strike came in silence. A convoy of Lazarus. Vehicles drove through an abandoned industrial district outside the city, 6 SUVs. Tinted windows, armored tires. Inside, one of them sat Marcus Dale, Lazarus's field director, reviewing shipment reports. A flicker of light in the distance caught his eye. Before he could react, boom. A shockwave tore through the lead car, flipping it into the air. The rest screeched to a halt, guards rushing out with rifles drawn. And then came the shadow. Samuel moved between the flames like smoke, swift, silent, unstoppable. One guard fell, then another. Within seconds, the night was filled with nothing but rain and fear. He cornered Marcus against the burning wreck, gun pressed to his chest. "Who's running Lazarus now?" he demanded. Marcus smirked even as blood dripped from his lip. "You think cutting off one head kills the serpent? She's already inside your circle, Carter. She's closer than you think." Before Samuel could press further, Marcus triggered a small detonator hidden in his hand. The explosion sent Samuel flying backwards, slamming him into the mud. When he looked up, Marcus was gone. Only fire remained, bleeding and limping. Samuel stumbled into a nearby safe house, an old mechanic's workshop he'd once used during his undercover days. He ripped off his coat, patched the wound on his arm, and threw his pistol on the table. His reflection in the cracked mirror stared back, a face hardened by betrayal. He whispered to himself, "If they're inside her circle, it means she's not safe." He reached for the encrypted phone, dialed a code that hadn't been used in years. After a long pause, a familiar voice answered, gravelly, calm, and dangerous. "Samuel Carter, thought you were dead." "Not yet," Samuel said, "but Lazarus will be soon." Meanwhile, back at Varel Industries, Victoria sat in her office, staring at her mother's photograph. The lights of the city shimmered through the glass behind her, but inside, she felt only darkness. She had just received an anonymous message on her screen. "Your security chief is not who he says he is. Check Project Guardian." Her heart raced. She opened the old company archives, and there it was. Files, dates, classified authorizations, Samuel's name stamped under. Project Guardian assigned to subject, Victoria of Varel. She stepped back in shock, tears welling in her eyes. No, it can't be. The man who saved her empire was the same man who had once been assigned to watch her, to report on her. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Who are you really, Samuel?" At that exact moment, across the city, Samuel stared at a cracked phone screen showing Victoria's picture. He wanted to call her, to explain, but he couldn't, not yet. Not until Lazarus was gone forever. He set the phone down, tightened his gloves, and walked toward the flickering lights of the underground train tunnels. His next destination was marked on his map. LZ, our main node, London Transmission Hub. He loaded a final magazine into his weapon. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon, and Samuel's shadow merged with the darkness. The quiet driver the world had forgotten was about to become the storm they would never forget. The rain over London never stopped. It fell in thin silver lines against the glass rooftops, dripping down into the streets like quiet grief. Samuel stepped out of the freight elevator beneath the Thames, boots echoing in the dark tunnel. His breath fogged in the cold air. The faint hum of servers pulsed in the distance, the LZ, our main node. He had tracked them for weeks. Every clue, every blood-stained lead, every broken lie had brought him here. Now, he was close enough to taste the truth that had poisoned his life. He moved through the corridor, pistol drawn, flashlight low. Every flicker of shadow felt alive. Every drip of water sounded like a whisper. At the end of the hall, a reinforced steel door hissed open. Behind it, a cavern of light, thousands of computers stacked in glass racks, running endless streams of code. In the center stood a woman in a white coat, her back turned to him. Samuel froze. Her voice floated through the hum of the machines, calm, smooth, familiar. "You took your time, Mr. Carter." He stepped forward slowly. "Who are you?" She turned, and for a heartbeat, the world stopped. Drive Aylin of Varel, alive. The same woman he had seen in the recording, Victoria's mother. The one everyone believed had died 15 years ago. His pulse thundered in his ears. "You're supposed to be dead." She smiled faintly. "So are you." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the servers filled the silence like 1,000 voices whispering secrets. Elena walked toward him, her expression unreadable. "Lazarus was never meant to destroy Victoria's company," she said softly. "It was meant to protect it." Samuel frowned. Protect it? By killing innocent people. By burning everything she built. The board betrayed her. They sold my research to foreign agencies. I created Lazarus to erase those who corrupted it. Samuel shook his head. You turned your daughter's life into a war zone. I saved her legacy. Elena snapped. You were my weapon to do it. He blinked, the words hitting him like bullets. What did you say? Elena looked into his eyes, calm and cold. You were part of Project Guardian, Samuel. I built you, trained you, programmed you to protect her, even from herself. Samuel's hand trembled on the trigger. That's a lie. You think your memory of the military, of losing your team, of redemption was all real. Half of it was. Half was written. He stepped back, disbelief flooding his mind. The flashbacks, the dreams, the fragments of memory that never made sense, they weren't guilt. They were code. The ground shook suddenly, alarms blared, red lights flashing across the chamber. Someone had breached the lower tunnels. Elena turned sharply. They found us. Victoria must have traced your signal. Samuel clenched his jaw. Then maybe it's time she learns the truth. He rushed toward the control console and started pulling the main drives. Elena shouted, Don't. Those contain the fail-safe for the neural net. Then tell me how to shut it down, he barked. She hesitated. You can't. It's linked to Victoria's core system. If you destroy Lazarus, you destroy her empire too. Samuel's heart pounded. She'd rather lose an empire than live a lie. Above ground, Victoria arrived at the London complex, escorted by two security vehicles. She stepped out into the storm, wind tearing at her hair. She had tracked Samuel's signal across continents. She didn't know if she was coming to save him or stop him. The elevator opened to the main tunnel. The blast doors slid aside, and there he was. Samuel, standing amid chaos, lights flashing red, sparks flying. Their eyes met. 1,000 words unspoken hung between them. Victoria, he said quietly, lowering his gun, you shouldn't be here. Neither should you, she answered, her voice trembling. Behind them, Elena emerged from the shadows. Mother, Victoria whispered. Time froze. Tears filled Victoria's eyes. How? How are you alive? Elena smiled faintly. Because I had to be. You were too young to understand what I was building. You built a monster. Victoria shouted. You destroyed everything. Elena's voice cracked for the first time. I built control. Humanity was collapsing under greed. I gave them an order. You call it Lazarus. I call it salvation. Samuel stepped between them, weapon raised. This ends tonight. Elena looked at him with something like pity. You won't kill me, Samuel. You were never programmed to. He fired, but the bullet stopped midair, clattering to the floor. Pain tore through his head, electric burning the neural fail-safe. You see? Elena whispered. You're mine. He dropped to one knee, fighting the pulse in his skull, veins trembling under the skin. Victoria ran forward. Stop it. You're killing him. He's not human. Elena screamed. He's code wrapped in flesh. A weapon I forged for you. Victoria pressed the emergency override on the console. Sparks exploded from the walls as power surged. The servers began to collapse, screens shattering one by one. You don't get to decide what he is. She cried. Smoke filled the room. Elena staggered back, clutching her chest as the system overloaded. If you destroy this network, the world will fall into chaos. Victoria looked at Samuel, who was barely conscious. The world's already in chaos, she said softly. She pressed the master switch. A blinding flash ripped through the chamber, white light swallowing everything. When it faded, the servers were dead. Silence returned. Only the hum of rain above the tunnels remained. Hours later, rescue teams found Victoria sitting beside Samuel's unconscious body. His pulse was weak but steady. She brushed the dust from his face and whispered, You're not a weapon. You're the only man who ever truly protected me. He opened his eyes slowly, voice faint. Did we win? She smiled through tears. Not yet, but we're still here. He closed his eyes again, relief softening his features as the sirens wailed in the distance. Far above, in the ruins of the tower, a single monitor flickered back to life. A distorted voice crackled through the speakers, one that was neither male nor female. Lazarus 01 terminated. Initializing Lazarus 02. The screen glowed bright red. Somewhere, in the depths of the digital web, something was waking up. And the world had no idea that the war was only just beginning. The world didn't stop after Lazarus fell. It just got quieter. To quiet. The headlines read, Betrayal Industries CEO survives cyber catastrophe. Lazarus files destroyed. But beneath the calm surface, in the parts of the world where truth never sleeps, people whispered another name. A name they couldn't trace, couldn't prove, but could never forget. Samuel Carter, the ghost who saved an empire and vanished. It had been 6 months since that night under the Thames. London had moved on. The skyscrapers stood tall again, the investors returned, the press forgot. But Victoria hadn't. She stood on the balcony of the rebuilt Betrayal headquarters, staring at the sunrise, the city glowing gold beneath the morning mist. Her hair fluttered in the wind as she whispered to herself, greater than, you disappeared once before. Samuel, don't make it twice. A gentle chime broke her silence. Her digital assistant flickered to life. A message received from an untraceable source. Just one line. Check the East Docks. 7 a.m. Her heartbeat quickened. The old harbor was empty. She arrived, just seagulls, fog, and the slow creak of rusted ships rocking in the tide. She walked across the worn planks, heels echoing against the wood. And then she saw him, standing at the end of the dock, hands in pockets, wearing the same coat, darker now. Older, torn at the seams, but still his. Samuel turned as she approached. His face bore scars of both war and peace. But his eyes, they were alive again. Victoria stopped a few steps away. I thought you were dead. He smiled faintly. I was, for a while. You didn't even say goodbye. Would you have let me go if I had? She hesitated, tears gathering at the edge of her eyes. You saved my life, my company, everything. But why come back now? He looked past her, toward the rising sun. Because the war isn't over. She frowned. What do you mean? He handed her a small chip, smooth, metallic, glowing faintly red. This came online 2 days ago. Lazarus 02. It's not human this time, it's pure code. A machine that learns, adapts, rebuilds. Victoria's eyes widened. We destroyed everything. Samuel shook his head. We destroyed their servers, not their seed. Elena's neural pattern was uploaded years before her death. It's her mind, Victoria, reborn as Lazarus. Silence fell between them, heavy, suffocating. The wind whipped through the air, carrying the scent of the sea. Then we stop it, Victoria said. Samuel looked at her, surprised. You'd risk everything again? It's not about empire anymore, she said softly. It's about legacy, about truth, about making sure no one else becomes what you were forced to be. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. They walked toward the waiting ship, an old cargo vessel, retrofitted with encrypted tech and silent engines. Inside, screens displayed live feeds, encrypted coordinates, and a map of unknown digital nodes. Victoria pressed her hand on the console. Where do we start? Samuel smirked. Where it all began. She looked up at him, realization dawning. The States. He nodded. New York. As the engines rumbled to life, Samuel took one last look at the fading London skyline. The city that had buried him once now stood behind him, rebuilt but scarred, just like him. He whispered under his breath, never underestimate the quiet ones. Victoria turned to him. What did you say? He smiled faintly. Because sometimes, the person you overlook today is the one saving your world tomorrow. She smiled back, eyes glistening. Then let's go save it again. The ship's horn echoed across the water as it disappeared into the fog, heading toward the horizon, to souls bound by fate, legacy, and the ghosts of what they'd survived. Months later, in a dark room somewhere in New York, a red light blinked on a computer screen. Code began to move, endless lines of self-writing script. Then a voice, calm, feminine, mechanical, whispered through the speakers, Hello, Victoria, I've been waiting. The screen flashed one final message before cutting to black. Lazarus, reborn. If you think this story ended here, think again? The quiet ones are never truly gone. They're just waiting for their moment to rise again. Subscribe because the next story is already unfolding.